Welcome, everybody. Hands on Apologetics. You have now entered into the Apologetic Zone, Virgin Most Powerful Apologetics Dojo. Now, let's talk about atheism, shall we? There are lots of slogans out there proposed by atheists, but how do we answer them? Well, our guest, John DeRosa, is on board, coming into the dojo. He has an undergraduate degree in math education at the College of New Jersey and an MA in Pure and Applied Mathematics in Montclair State University. But many of you know him through his work on the website, www.classicaltheism.com, which is an awesome website with lots of great videos and interviews on atheism, Christianity, Catholicism, great stuff, and free books, by the way. John DeRosa, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Gary Machuda, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for having me back today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's always good to have you on board because, after all, I mean, you are Mr. Classical Theism himself.
Well, I will say we're pretty strict at the Classical Theism podcast. We call ourselves studious amateurs. We want to come alongside. I come alongside the guests. We learn from great experts, content that we can present in conversation. But I'll tell you what, Gary, even though, I call myself a studious amateur, I think the listeners of your show, of my show, I think they would like that label as well. But guess what? If you even have that if you have that amateur label, you're already far ahead of a lot of the people out there who are criticizing the faith with these superficial slogans without really digging deep. If you have any level of understanding and you want to learn about this stuff, I think you can go a long way towards steering our young people and other people back towards the church.
And the first slogan we're tackling is that there's no evidence for the existence of God. Now, John, you tackled the one where you asked the person what was the best argument they heard. They would say none, and then you can present them some evidence. But how do you answer the atheist who will say, well, the evidence I found was not very good, it was full of holes, and they might even give you some examples.
I think honestly, I think that's the most common answer you're going to get is, well, I've heard Christians say they just have faith, or that they have to, they prayed once and then something happened, or the design argument from Paley's watchmaker, something like that. And if they present that type of weak evidence, remember, you ask them, what's the best thing you've heard? And if that's all that they respond with, then again, you want to say something like, wow, I have to agree with you that is not that great of objective evidence. If that's the best evidence you've heard, I understand why you're skeptical. But can I offer you what I take to be some really good arguments? Because there's objective facts about the world that we can show philosophically point to the existence of God. And that's where you could talk about, hey, have you ever heard the Kalam argument? The universe began to exist. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Or you could talk about the moral argument and some other things that you can practice. If you get really, if you go to classicaltheism.com, you start practicing more. We get into the Aristotelian proof for the existence of God, which is based on the first way of Thomas Aquinas. But the bottom line is you can affirm the person. And this is a great conversational tactic to build rapport. You affirm that evidence is not very strong, and you offer something more for their consideration. The final option, and I'll just say this briefly, they might respond with something pretty good. They might say, hey, you know what? Well, I've been studying the cosmological argument, and I've been studying the moral argument, but I think they have this flaw in them. I think they fail because of this reason. And that person has done their homework. We have to say, hey, you know what? I really appreciate you did your homework. You looked up these arguments. And if you have studied the argument yourself, you can offer a response. Well, maybe they think the Kalam argument commits the fallacy of composition, or the contingency argument commits the fallacy of composition. These are just common things you hear. We discuss them on the podcast. You can answer them. But if you know the answer, you could say, I've heard that objection before. What do you think of this response? Or at the very worst, in that case, you might have to say, you know what, that's a good food for thought. I'm going to have to go back and study that, but I am going to study it and get back to you because I think it's a good argument. So if someone says there's no evidence for God's existence, you have to ask them, what's the best evidence you've heard, and what do you think is wrong with it?
Yeah, excellent. That's beautiful because, right, and I like the way you put it, too. It's not like, no, that's wrong because, it's not the fallacy of composition because blah, blah, blah. I like the way how you said have you ever considered this? So it's like you're looking at a third party's argument, and that takes a lot of the heat out of the argument. It's not like you're wrong and this is why. It's more like, did you ever consider this answer to that objection?
That's exactly right. And that one of the big things once you start having these conversations, you're going to see some people get very upset, very heated very quickly, and you just want to have different tactics and different ways of toning down the conversation. Let them know, hey, I care about you. I think this is important stuff. Let's just talk about it together and get at the truth.
Yeah, very good. Well, why don't we jump to one of the new ones? Go ahead. Why don't you pick a new addition to your list of slogans?
Okay, yeah. So I kind of mixed them all in, so it's hard to know what's new and what's not. But here's one I added. So they might not say there's no evidence for God's existence, but chapter 2, this is very common. They'll say faith. Christians believe things on faith, but faith is irrational. It's silly to believe things without evidence or to pretend to know things you don't really know. So you Christians, you're just irrational. Have you ever heard that before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So here's what you got to do. Stick to the questions. And in the introduction, I explained the 3 generic ways you want to start your question are, what do you mean by that? The second way is, how'd you come to that conclusion? And the third way is, have you ever considered such and such, as you just picked up on? Those are kind of like the 3 general sentence starters. And then in the specifics, you got to tailor them to the particular case. So in this case, you got to ask this person. They said faith is irrational. Hey, you say faith is irrational, but what do you mean by faith? Can you tell us more? What do you mean by that? Because in all honesty, a lot of time, the person who makes this objection is working with an absolutely defective understanding of what faith is. Absolutely. And they'll typically say, yeah, you know what I'm talking about here. They'll typically say something like, well, faith is a belief without any evidence, or faith is believing in spite of all evidence. It's just a blind leap. Those are some things that they might say.
Or faith is believing in something can't possibly be true.
Well, I mean, that is like, oh my gosh, if that's what it is, then okay, I will admit to you, I don't even want to have faith if that's the case. So you got to start out, get their definition on the board. What do you mean by that? And then you can inform them, hey, you know what? I understand that that's what you're saying faith is, but I think it's a mischaracterization of the traditional Christian position. I don't think faith is like that. And if I did, I'm with you. I wouldn't want to have faith if I think it's that. Instead, you make it sound that Christians have no good reasons to believe any of the things they do. They just believe it by blind faith, and that's that. But that's not the case. And then you have to say, well, have you ever considered this? And then you offer, a better definition. And hey, we got a catechism. We're Catholics here. You can go to the catechism when you need some good information. But faith, we consider, is a theological virtue. It's that by which we believe God and all that he has revealed, but it's not a blind impulse of the mind. Because faith, so it's a virtue, it involves a trusting and believing in God. That part the atheist has right, that it does involve belief and trust, but the thing is, it's not a blind impulse of the mind, and that's specific wording in the catechism that I'm taking. It's based on motives of credibility. This is a phrase that our church uses, that Christians have used for centuries. In other words, it's based on good reasons to think that God has revealed such and such. So faith, it's not a blind leap into the dark. It's based on the fact that we think God revealed certain things. Why do we think he revealed it? Well, he's given us motives of credibility. We have some miracles to consider. You might And by the way, we're just talking about what faith is. You don't necessarily have to go into a whole case. I'm just giving you some more background on this. But there's miracles to consider. There's the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. We have very good historical evidence that this occurred. There's other Eucharistic miracles that Catholics can point to, though I wouldn't recommend going there with skeptics in a first conversation. There's other historical miracles, such as the miracle at Fatima, where a lot of atheists and skeptics were present and still acknowledge that something supernatural took place in the sky. So we have some miracles to buttress our position. We have prophecies from the Old Testament that Jesus fulfilled. And then we also have the holiness of the saints, these people who, like Mother Teresa, who just showed such radical holiness in the way that they lived their lives, lend credibility to the fact that God has revealed truth in the Bible, in Scripture, in tradition, and through the church. So faith if the atheist is correct that it's just blind in spite of the evidence, we don't want to hold it, but we want to ask them, what do you mean by faith? Because my faith is informed by the evidence and flows from it.
We got a couple of minutes to the break. Why don't you throw out another one? Maybe something.
Or here's
that's
a quick
pretty
one.
short.
Here's a quick one I think we could do. Chapter 5, where is God? Have you ever seen him? No. He's untestable. He's unfalsifiable. Where is this God? And this is a classic objection. Like, you don't see God under a microscope. The Russians, they went up in the space places, wherever they went, and they said, oh, there's no God. There's nothing up here in the heavens. And I like this one because I think you can ask this person a fun question if they're complaining about where is God. The scientists don't see him. Nobody sees him. Here's the question you can ask them. And then we can just briefly go back into this after the break. But when someone says, where is God? Have you seen him? No, he's untestable. He's unfalsifiable. You ask them this. Well, hey, I got a question for you. When you look at the Mona Lisa, you know the Mona Lisa, right? When you're looking at the Mona Lisa, where's the painter?
Oh, yeah.
Just let them think about that for a second. When you're looking at the Mona Lisa, where is the painter? And that question can hopefully it forces them to think, well, hey, I don't see the painter anywhere. The painter isn't an element within the painting. He's not like hiding over there in the corner or in some layer. God is not some item in the universe. The God of classical theism transcends the universe. He transcends all the created stuff. He's not the type of thing that you're going to find under the microscope, but that doesn't imply that he doesn't exist. Just as the fact that you can't find the painter inside the Mona Lisa, that doesn't imply that the painting has no painter. The painter is the creator of the whole painting, just as God is the metaphysically necessary creator and sustainer of our whole universe. So if someone says, where's God? Have you ever seen him? You can ask them, when you're looking at the Mona Lisa, where's the painting?
Yeah, very good. We're talking with John DeRosa on answering common atheist slogans. More on the other side of the break, folks. Stay tuned. The slogan, where is God? That you bring up a really interesting point. I mean, that was a great way to respond. Where's the painter in the Mona Lisa, right? But it's funny how. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I like that it gets at like the type of evidence we're looking for. That's kind of the difference, because if you're only used to thinking about one type of evidence, the type of evidence that you can see in a laboratory, and you don't consider like philosophical evidence or historical evidence, then yes, it is quite hard to come to see God. But once you allow philosophy and history and other things into the ball game, then we can bring out those clues and those arguments that point to God.
What I like about this particular slogan is it highlights something that is very common out there, and that is that non-believers often try to use their imagination of what God would be if they were God, and they often make him into a feature of the universe, like this old man dwelling up in the sky somewhere. And so when you say, where is God, that, lurking behind it is that misconception that, God somehow is dwelling within his own creation, outside of the incarnation.
That's such a great point, and it shows that Gary Machuda is a classical theist, because that's one of our big emphases at the Classical Theism podcast, is that God is not a creature like we are. He's radically different than us. He's transcendent from us. So you got to get that picture of the old man in the sky, the bearded guy up there. You kind of got to put that out of your mind when you're considering traditional monotheism and Catholic Christianity in particular.
Well, go ahead. Pick another new slogan to your book.
Yeah, this is a brutal one, because you're going to hear this a lot, and it'll just put you, you'll be stuck in the mud if you haven't prepared for it. It's chapter 10 in the new table of contents, but the God of the Bible is an evil maniac who commits atrocity after atrocity. Have you ever heard that one before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. In fact, there was a very prominent new atheist that makes that, well, actually a couple of them that make that argument.
I think it might even be all of them. Now that I'm
that's true. Now that I think about it. Yeah, right.
Dawkins makes that argument. Let's see who else. Christopher Hitchens,
the late
makes
Hitchens,
a similar argument. And Trent Horn just debated a few months ago Dan Barker, who you might consider a new atheist. I know he wasn't part of the original four, but that was a prominent piece in their debate. So I'm going to recommend if you're encountering this argument, like the God of the Bible is an evil maniac who commits atrocity after atrocity, if you want to get some more resources for diving into that, yeah, I'll have a few pages in my ebook. I'll give you some bullet points, some questions, but check out that debate with Trent Horn and Dan Barker, because Trent has a great approach. He's polished, and he's great at responding quick in a debate context.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's been in the dojo a few times. So, yeah, we're more than familiar with Trent Horn's work.
Very good. Well, here's the first thing. So how can we approach this? First thing I suggest, you got to ask this person, how did you come to that conclusion? Just start with a general question. You got to get more information. You can't just start going off on a whole thing, because the odds are this person is parroting comments from other atheists that they've heard on the internet or from some passing remarks that they've read in books. Let's just say the person is able to reference typically the commands to wipe out the Canaanites and other tribes are a common thing that's discussed under here. So let's assume this person's done their homework. They have some reference where God ordered the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites, every man, woman, child, oxen, and so forth. Let's just say they're able to come up with that reference, okay? So what might you do in this case? And again, it's a tough issue, and there's a lot of different ways to tackle it. I'm just going to give you 2 points to remember, and that's this. One, here's the thing. God is not a human moral agent like we are. We can agree with the objector that if God were just like some super powerful guy, flying around in the sky, arbitrarily killing people, commanding them to do terrible things, just like we are, but like flying around, that would be terrible. Okay, he would be subject to moral censure. But Christians traditionally don't think of God that way. As classical theists, we hold that God is beyond us. His nature is radically different from us. He's the creator of all reality. But as it says in Isaiah, his ways are higher than our ways. And as St. Paul affirms, how inscrutable are his ways? He says that in Romans 11. He asks that question. So God is not, he transcends us. I'll make another point, but he's not a human moral agent. He's the uncreated and unchanging creator. In other words, he can't be evaluated on the same level that we are. He doesn't get better or worse. He's not like a Boy Scout who's like going to get all the merit badges because he did super well. God is already self-sufficient and perfect in himself. So why do I bring this up? Well, again, it would be wrong for humans or human moral agents to do the things that God does in the Old Testament. We don't have the authority. We're not the creators of all that exists. But God is the author of all life. He has the authority to take and give life as he sees fit, and he doesn't owe any of us a long, happy, healthy life, although we might want that. So that's the first point. God's beyond us. He has the authority as the author to give and take life as he sees fit. Now, people are uncomfortable with that. They don't like that idea. So additionally, I would point out this, because it's very distasteful to say that nowadays. Point out God's judgment, that although God's beyond us, he has the authority to take life as he sees fit. Point out that God's judgment will be perfect. There will be no mistakes in the final judgment. And I even remember a priest saying something like this to me in college. Like, there's no worry that on a Catholic Christian worldview, God killed a bunch of people or ordered them to be killed, and they're going to end up in the wrong place. No. If they're saved by grace, by being engrafted into Christ, even if they only lived a short life, they will be given eternal life. And if they die in a state of mortal sin, if they're willfully separated from God, then God's not going to force them into his kingdom against their will. So point out to the person that God's judgment will be perfect. Don't worry that, because I think the worry is Israelites are slaughtering people, and there's like some innocent people that are going to get taken away. You don't need to worry about that. God will sort everything out in his perfect final judgment. So I think those 2 major points can help dispel a little bit about these atrocities. 1, God's not a human moral agent that can be judged on the same grounds. And 2, his final judgment will be perfect. There will be no mistakes.
Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.